Hi, I'm Zach Singerman, and welcome to the Gen Z Jews Learning from Leaders series. In this series, I'm interviewing national leaders on the topics of anti-Semitism, Israel, and leadership. Today, our guest is award-winning author and director of creative writing at Bryn Mawr College, Daniel Torday. He has won numerous awards, including the National Jewish Book Award. Mr. Torday, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you, and please call me Dan.
So, I just wanted to begin for the audience to tell them that you're a prolific writer, but not all of your writings have been focused on Judaism or anti-Semitism. Now, back in 2017, you wrote your essay, Searching for Meaning After a Jewish Cemetery is Desecrated. And in this, you discussed what happened when a Jewish cemetery in Philadelphia was vandalized, and you compared it to your experience of visiting one as a child in Hungary. It almost seems to have foreshadowed the increasing number of anti-Semitic acts in the United States. Do you feel that in the last 4 years we're moving closer to that feeling of anti-Semitism in Hungary?
Yeah, that's a good question. For a little background, I had heard about these desecration of these graves up in Northeast Philadelphia. I don't remember exactly how far after the election was, but it was really just a couple months after Trump was elected. And I'll say, the initial piece that I wrote was definitely more, metaphorically, but directed more at the this new sense of authoritarianism and totalitarianism that was clearly starting to take place after the election. America's history is not at all like Hungary's history. Hungary was actually an Axis power during World War II, so they lent material support to the Nazis. My experience of, and it's far too complicated to get into, but my family's Holocaust history there, and my experience of my time that I've spent there is that there has continued to be a kind of Hungarian anti-Roma feeling in a way that they approach the Roma population there. There frankly isn't much of a Jewish population left after the war. So, I think it would be awfully hard to compare a country where George Washington said that he would gladly take a Muslim or a Jew or anyone to work with him to a European country with that kind of history. That said, we have certainly seen a rise in anti-Semitism, anti-Asian hatred, racism in the last 4 years. That's frankly horrifying. And I would say, what I meant to say from the top is it's awesome that you're doing this project. I think it's super useful to just have these questions over and over again, updated to the moment that we're in. I think that there's a social safety net and a cultural safety net in this country that allows us to avoid the kinds of very serious. Even just in the piece that you're talking about, I did it for Terry Gross on NPR, and I didn't even know at the time that I went to look at those cemeteries that my family's cemetery in this small city called Gyöngyös north of Budapest had actually been not just desecrated, but people had actually gone in and dug up the graves and strewn bones about the place. If that happened in the United States, it would be national news.
Yeah.
Right? That's more than just, not to diminish it, but that's more than just knocking over some headstones and scrawling graffiti. So, there is surely a rise of rightist hatred that is global right now, and it's our job to stamp it out at every turn.
So, last year, you decided to read the Protocols of the Elders of Zion. And although a lot of Jews have heard about them, not many have actually read them in their entirety.
Thankfully.
Now, yeah. Now, from a literary perspective, you wrote that it's so incoherent, and that when one is reading it, that you could think that 1,000 monkeys with 1,000 typewriters given 1,000 years couldn't compose King Lear, but those same monkeys given 6 months and a bottomless pot of coffee might have created this mess. So why do you think that this incoherent writing became the leading anti-Semitic piece of literature?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, some of it is clearly historical. The document actually was sort of like an update of this French anti-Semitic document that had come out in the mid-19th century, and then it gained purchase in the kind of like czarist Russian period in the 1900s. But it's stuck around, and I guess I would just say, in a way that's probably not dissimilar from like how we've approached stuff that we find on Facebook or on Twitter or on TikTok now. It's meant to be a sort of discovered document. So in some ways, it's like it's being unpolished is part of what makes it like signifies its accuracy, right? Like it feels like somebody just found some stuff that people were talking about in a room, and then they're giving it across. So I think that just an initial sense, in a weird way, its incoherence is part of what is meant to suggest its authenticity. There's also just a weird universality to it, right? It's just sort of like people blathering hatred about things. To be honest with you, like a year on from having written that piece, it's so kind of all over the map and incoherent that I honestly like don't even remember that much of what I read in it, right? Like it was very, I mean, the pain of going through it was as much, it's just being poorly written and incoherent as it was about the hate that was entailed. I mean, which also makes me feel, I mean, people pull out quotes from it that they've found elsewhere, but I doubt very many people have read the whole thing. I mean, even the people who use it as a conspiracy theory, for the most part, they've probably found a sentence or two and it gets passed along and it gets bastardized and botherized. And, you know, I mean, I think my purpose in reading it was to say, like, what if you tried to actually wrap your mind around it in any serious way? And I think that does kind of bear out that, like, to the question that you're asking, like, part of the point is its incoherence, right? And one of the things I did in that piece was to try to just, the way you would any text in a college classroom, and kind of nerdy, just say, like, what if you tried to read Trump speeches or Q drops in the same way? Because a lot of QAnon followers have had there's an intense anti-Semitism amongst the QAnon movement, and it's kind of equally incoherent, you know, and they
like
use a lot of the same. What's that?
Like space lasers.
Yes, there were no space lasers in Russia in 1905, but there are Jewish space lasers now. No, I mean, it is, you know, I guess what I would say is this. I think it can be very easy to dismiss the absurd out of hand and then not take it seriously. And I think that is inherently the mistake that we all made, myself included, when Trump started to run for office, right? Which is that you might say, like, who would be stupid enough to follow a person as frankly stupid as Donald Trump? And the answer is potentially enough people to get them elected, right? I feel confident in saying there has never been a reasonable, intelligent, coherent, smart, totalitarian leader, right? Like that's not who become totalitarian leaders. The people who become totalitarian leaders are people who are incoherent and are not the most intelligent, and there's a history of that in the United States, right? From Father Coughlin in the 40s to George Wallace to David Duke. There's always been these flashes, and they actually, I mean, if you look at the sort of support that they had, they're usually in about the same range as kind of the top of what Trump reached. They're usually like 25 to 35% of the population, and there have been guardrails in our representative democracy that have always existed to try to keep them in check, and those guardrails are off right now. And you know, I think a vlog or YouTube channel like you have is a great way of saying, like, let's just in every corner put those guardrails back up.
Mm-hmm. Do you believe that your writing on these like anti-Semitic types of acts or writings is a form of activism?
So I might have to ask you what you mean by activism, and then I can answer the question better. Like, what do you think of as activism?
I would say, like, fighting for what you believe in and just trying to make a difference.
I think as an artist and as a writer, and certainly as a politically attuned citizen, our job is always just to speak truth as radically and as honestly as possible. Right. And if everybody were to just be like pretty damn honest about what they saw and thought, we'd be in a better place. And those are probably probably the bare minimum guidelines for having a democracy to begin with. So, was George Orwell being an activist in writing politics in the English language? I don't think so. I think he was just writing as truthfully as possible. Maybe the best analog I can think of is I remember when Biden was running for president last year, and people were talking about some like relatively radical progressive moves that he might be able to make, like thinking about what like it legitimately would mean to defund the police, which probably just means like take some of the funding for the police and put it towards mental health care or other ways of dealing with the population, or what's referred to as the Green New Deal. And I heard like a really smart political commentator say, Biden doesn't need to adopt those things, right? Like we need to just keep yelling about it, and he needs to keep hearing it. But it's actually not the way it's supposed to work. So then, as the leader of the party, immediately say, I'm going to deal. I'm going to just put all this in my party platform, right? There's a dialectic that has to take place there. So I guess I would say I think it's my job to just be as honest as I can possibly be, and try to encourage other people to laugh when that happens, or to feel the shock of recognition when it happens. And then maybe that the sort of next layer is where that activism could take place. I would love to be quoted at some point. That would make me very happy.
Do you think that writing helps you process the growing anti-Semitism in America today?
Absolutely. I might say more reading helps me process the growing anti-Semitism in America today. And if there were some like books that I could put in front of the Gen Z massive population that's going to be watching this YouTube, I would say like read some Hannah Arendt. The Origins of Totalitarianism is like the most relevant book to our moment that I can think of. And certainly, it doesn't all have to be like super duper serious, right? I think just, whatever you're reading that just shows you a human as a human and not a human as a fixed identity has to help. And that doesn't necessarily have to be related to religion or anti-Semitism or any of what we're talking about. Just there's a kind of magic that takes place in just entering someone else's head that makes it a whole lot harder to hate or to be violent. And so whatever that, if that's reading bad guys, graphic novels like my kids are really into, or even if it's sometimes watching like really good television, I think that's plenty,
Now, just changing the subject a little away from anti-Semitism. So I read that you said it back in each September in your 20s, you bought the LSAT book, and by October you had pushed it aside completely. Now, instead of pursuing a career as a lawyer, you pursued your passion. What advice would you give to Gen Z in pursuing their passions?
Yeah, well, let me say, I'm sort of joking, not joking about the LSAT thing. I definitely, probably like many young Jews at my bar mitzvah, there were plenty of lawyers in the audience, and some of the more successful ones came up and said, you'd be good at that. Which, when I was 13, if somebody told me to do something, my initial knee jerk would be like, I'm definitely not going to do that. I'd still love to go to law school at some point, just for the fun of taking constitutional law classes. And I read a ton on that front. And I can recommend like two of my favorite podcasts are the Lawfare podcast and Strict Scrutiny podcast are like great in following the Supreme Court. But ultimately I really loved writing. So, I think what I would say is you have to follow your passions and you have to find a way to do the things that you really love. I think one thing, I was lucky in my first job at a undergrad, I was an editor at Esquire magazine. So I was living in New York, and one of my best friends from college was at law school at NYU. So I got to really watch him and his friends as they went through. And I think the biggest thing that I saw for them in law school was like, the folks who graduated, like, top 1 or 2% in the class got to go on and do stuff like work for the UN or, argue amicus briefs in front of the Supreme Court. The stuff that's like sexy and sounds like it would be really fun to be a lawyer. But that was a massive time commitment, and you kind of had to be a gunner. And most of the rest of folks ended up doing a lot of document review and working 120 hours a week. So I saw pretty quickly, like, if I was going to do it, I had to really go all in on it. Which might also be just to say, like, at least until the end of college. I'm assuming that your audience will attend college. It also is just practically better to succeed at the things that you love and are good at than it is to be worried about pathways, right? So, I mean, my students here at Bryn Mawr and Haverford who graduate magna cum laude or summa cum laude in the things they love, if it's anthropology or if it's music or if it's creative writing or whatever it is, are actually better positioned to then just take an LSAT and have a background that makes them look successful than if you felt like you had to do poli-sci or pre-law somewhere and it wasn't right for you and you got middling grades. Like, that's not going to help you be a lawyer either. So I guess part of what I'm saying is, like, I think from like a romantic position, yeah, do the thing you love. But from a practical position, like, succeed at the stuff you love and then figure out what you want to do next. I think probably the average matriculating law student at this point is probably closer to 30 than 20. So there's always going to be a period of thinking those things through. Can I ask you, do you want to be a lawyer?
I doubt it.
And what's your passion?
Currently, theater and football and stuff like that.
Cool. Yeah. Well, so look, I mean, I think take those theater classes, and take those acting classes, and there's going to be a period to pursue your dreams, and that period is the whole rest of your life. And along the way, no matter what you do, you're going to end up having to figure out a way to make a living as well. And there's always going to be a balance between those two. And I don't mean to make it sound easy, but I think if you follow the thing you love, you're going to be good at it, and it's always going to lead you in the right direction.
And just to wrap us up, is there anything else that you'd like to say to Gen Z?
Yeah. I mean, I guess I would just say, like, for me, like, the fun part about being a college professor is, and like when I first started teaching, I think I was 27 or 28, so I was only like 5 years older than some of my seniors. But just seeing how politically active you all have been and how much you've been able to drive conversations about climate change and about these kinds of questions of, like, being against hate is really inspiring, and it really does trickle up. So be exactly as vocal and exactly as involved as you are right now, and we'll all just continue to be grateful for it.
Well, thank you so much, Mr. Torday, for coming on today.
Thanks for having me on, Zach.
Bye.